and welcome back to Season 5 of the Lighting Your Way podcast. My name is Betty Long, and I am your host during these conversations. I do hope that you enjoy them, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Violence against nurses is at an all-time high. 1 in 4 nurses are assaulted, either verbally or physically, but only 20 to 60% of those incidents are reported. This episode's guest is Jeanne Venella, Chief Nurse Executive and Strategic Advisor for Commure Strongline, a health technology company. Jeanne shares information and ideas on reducing the incidence of workplace violence in the healthcare system. Hope you enjoy this conversation. Good afternoon, Jeanne Venella. Welcome to the Lighting Your Way podcast. Thanks for being on.
Well, thank you for having me so much. I am looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes, me too. And it's long awaited. Nurse violence or violence against nurses or workplace violence. Lot to talk about, lot to unwrap, as they say. But you have been a nurse a long time. And so I want to start first by talking about your career before we start talking about the issue of workplace violence. But tell us about your career. How'd you get started? You were a peds nurse, right?
I was. I was introducing myself on another venue the other day, and I was minimizing my years as a career in my career. My daughter's like, "You're skimping on some years there, Mom." But I am over 40 years of nursing experience. I guess you'd say a kind of a quintessential lifelong learner. I was a diploma grad and a new grad into emergency nursing.
Wow.
And then one of the very first RN to BSNs at Villanova University in the early 80s, and then went right into CHOPS ED at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. And I had a career there for over 25 years with various leadership roles.
Wow.
And then an opportunity came kind of from out of the blue, but a good friend of mine, another nurse practitioner, started kind of a very boutique kind of consulting company that only really focused on emergency nursing, process improvement, and leadership development. And so while they thought in the beginning that my ped skills, may not be transferable to the adult world, they quickly found out that, emergency nursing is emergency nursing and process improvement is process improvement. And I had a great foundation from CHOP learning, from some really amazing pediatricians and leaders there on quality improvement and how you really do process improvement in the early days.
Wow.
And then I stayed there for about 10 years. Got to improve emergency departments all around the country, which was really exciting. And then in 2012, I completed my doctoral in nursing practice and decided to kind of be home-based again and pivoted into technology. The reason being that I saw so many bad implementations and lack of adoption that I thought if I go to the source and make an impact in development, then hopefully the end product would be better for a larger group of people than, say at one hospital base. So that's what drove me into technology. Really the poor design, the poor implementations, and then that led, of course, to early lack of adoption and workaround, right out of the box. So I felt like I needed to get involved and make this better, because certainly technology was just on the cusp back then and is even more so now.
Yeah, and what's interesting as I listen to your career journey is that there's so many opportunities when you're a nurse to jump in to do different things. You took you took the process, you took your practical experience, then you went into process improvement and quality. And then I appreciate your reason for getting into technology. Like, you want to make sure that you start from a good place first, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Exactly, which is design really and development. Before, any engineer can design something, in isolation, but how it impacts the end user is really what's important. But what I was going to say about my career journey is I've done a lot of work with student nurses over my career, and I'm passionate about it. I still teach at Villanova University, and I say the only limit is your imagination to where you can go in nursing. You know, you want to work at the Billy's ballpark, you want to work on a Carnival cruise ship, you want to work in technology. Nursing and my career has been described as like a chameleon. You just change colors for wherever your expertise is needed.
So would you, looking back now, and we'll get into your current role in a minute, but looking back, would you have changed anything in your journey?
I don't think I would have.
Okay.
So, I think leaving CHOP was a very, very difficult decision after 25 years, but it formed, I had a foundation where I needed to go and be an expert outside of those four walls, or, you know, that big organization. And it was a risk in a way, but it launched me to this kind of executive path in technology that I felt really well prepared for.
Right. So now you're the chief nurse executive and strategic advisor for Commure Strongline, which is a health technology company.
That's right.
Much like you said. So obviously the journey has evolved, but how did you find yourself in that role, and talk about your responsibilities?
Yeah. So I've been CNO and CNE executive for about 4 technology companies, much like the healthcare environment. There's lots of mergers and acquisitions in this industry also. But I actually got back with Strongline to the summer after COVID. I was working with another colleague of mine at the convention center with the active military doing the vaccines, and really thought I was going to pivot into a different direction. And a pediatrician that I worked with at CHOP back in the 80s, Howard Grant, reached out to me through LinkedIn. Emery Papa, who you know, and I wrote a workplace violence article back in 2013. It was published. And he said, "Is this the same Jeanne Venella that used to run circles around me in the CHOP ED?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And so he retired. He had a very long, illustrious executive career, and was looking for some nurse leaders to join their advisory team at Strongline. And so that's actually, a personal invitation. That's how I got connected with Strongline.
Wow. That's cool. So what are your what are your responsibilities in that role?
Yeah. So it's an interesting role, and that's why I really love it. I consider myself an expert at end-to-end operations. So I'll start with a new client as a clinical sales support with the sales team. In a sales meeting, the client often doesn't want to hear about the widget they're buying. They want to hear about the problem they're solving. And I put context around that. I go out to the deployments. I help with education. We use their own like net learning platforms and supply them with the tools they need to have an really amazing kind of launch and implementation. Then we check back on adoption and usage and continued customer support.
Okay.
So I really kind of see myself from the stretcher side to the boardroom, and everything in between once a client has engaged with us, and we're ready for deployment.
So what you're training on is a wearable staff duress button, right?
Right. Sometimes known as a panic button, right?
Okay.
So, but it's wearable. So it kind of is discreet. It's about the size of a butter patty. It kind of sits behind your ID badge. It doesn't need to be charged. It doesn't need to be assigned to every day to a specific staff member. It comes assigned to that staff member.
Okay.
And then they put it on behind their ID badge. And if they find themselves in a position of a patient or family member that's escalating, or they feel unsafe, there's a silent duress alert that is activated when you press the button, and it rings to the security dashboard, and then security responds almost in a swifter manner because they know the person who's in duress and the exact location. So rather than like security coming to the front desk in the emergency department of a 100-bed ED, they go right to room 53 and are looking for the employee who pressed the button.
Okay.
So they're cut down on response times. And the interesting thing about the tool is that I think the most interesting thing is there's a proximate alerting feature, Betty. So if I'm in triage out in the lobby,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in the trauma room, kind of right behind me, but behind, double doors.
Yeah.
And I press my badge and you're the closest, you also get notified while that signal is going to security.
Oh.
And so you can come up to triage and say, hey, Jeannie, is everything okay here?
Mm.
So it acts as an early de-escalation tool or a safety where you can remove me if necessary. Then if you came upon me and I'm in trouble in triage, you then activate your badge. Now you're telling security we've got two staff members in duress at that same location.
Okay. We're going to talk more about workplace violence against nurses, but as you travel the country, what are you hearing from nurse executives and nurses? What are the reasons they're bringing in the Strongline system?
Well, the main reason is that, a big McKinsey report came out about 2 years ago, and the number one reason why staff leave a position is feeling unsafe. 92% reported if they felt unsafe, they're more likely to leave. And so when you talk in terms of cost ROI on Strongline, and you talk about turnover, we know what the average cost of one nurse turnover is. It's about $100,000 to an organization. And if you think about the cost of contract labor, which, we saw, implode over COVID, it's really for the return on investment, keep their staff safe. And as Press Ganey reports, when the workplace isn't safe, everything suffers. And I like to say everything, in terms of staff safety, staff engagement, staff morale. You see worse outcomes. You see clinical efficiency start to suffer if everyone is scared. And then you also see the patient experience suffer. So everything suffers when there's a high workplace violence incident at your organization, and anything you can do to arm your staff is really important. And I know we focused a lot on nurses, and we will continue to, but we provide these badges for any forward patient facing employee. So dietary aid, environmental service worker, the finance person who comes in to collect the copay, registration. Certainly, two of our biggest clients now are providing them for resident physicians and student nurses as a recruiting tool that we care about your safety if you were to come to work for us after your education. So we provide them to everybody. Well, at least the organization makes a decision to apply to get them for everybody.
And do you see that, like, it's been after an incident that hospitals will kind of create, okay, we have to do training, we have to get a tool like Strongline, like, is it usually an incident that has happened?
Right. Just like everything else in healthcare, you see it a little bit more reactive than proactive, right? But the cost of a workplace violence incident to a hospital, and fines and OSHA fines and employee disability and lost work time and sick time helps sometimes drive a decision. But, the fact that nurses are 4 times more likely to be injured at work than a police officer is kind of a scary statistic.
It is really.
I always think about when I see our local police officers pulling over a car, even in my little town where I live, and they kind of have their hand on their gun and they're approaching the car for a traffic violation. That gives me pause, right? Like I take note of that, right? But I don't think anybody thinks when a nurse puts a stethoscope on their neck and goes in for their shift that they have 4 times more likely to be hurt at work than an officer. So that's what kind of drives me. And what else is happening in our world that's making nurse executives do this, besides certainly cost, right, of the investment, is the level of incivility in our country has escalated, and it's transferred into the workspace for all of healthcare. And many incidences in the past year that you've seen on the news have been at medical buildings.
Right.
People, the big shooting
Yep.
last fall, that the gentleman wasn't satisfied with the outcome of his orthopedic surgery. He went to the office and shot the doctor, the registrar, and the receptionist. So it's not limited to the hospitals, but that's certainly where the stress levels are probably the highest, right?
Yeah, and it's not, thank God, just a shooting or a physical assault. There's also a lot of verbal assault and
there sure is
language and I've talked to my colleagues of guardian nurses and to my colleagues a lot of throughout the country, and everyone at some point in their career has been a victim of some sort of assault, whether it's verbal or physical.
Right. I've been lecturing on this topic a lot lately around the country, and I open the lecture with if you have the courage to stand up and you've been verbally assaulted in the last month, please stand up. And if you have the courage to stand up if you've been physically assaulted in the last month, please stand up. And honestly, after those first two questions, nearly the whole room is standing.
Jeez.
And these have been emergency nursing conferences. But the sad part about the verbal assault is that it's like the iceberg. About 70% of verbal abuse and assault cases are not reported.
Right.
And that's in a whole nother topic, Betty, because how we make reporting accessible to staff is very complicated, right? You have to leave what you're doing. You're already shaken. Now you have to open this system. That system doesn't talk to this system. Maybe you have to call the nurse supervisor. And so people normalize being yelled at, and then they don't report it.
Right.
And so no matter how bad you think your organization is, it's probably a lot worse because of the non-reporting or the difficult reporting.
So in your travels, have you seen nurse executives and hospital leaders making it, changing that culture, or kind of supporting the nurses to make it easier?
Well, yes. But the one thing that Strongline does do is it has a reporting system attached to it. So the nurse actually doesn't have to do anything. So if you're in a room and you're being verbally yelled at and you activate your badge, security comes and there's kind of a drop down in when security closes the incident. Was it handled by the staff? Did security have to intervene? The level of granularity that's there, so that each unit on the floor can get a report of how many times their badges were activated, how many times security intervened, actually what the response time is. So we can complement the reporting system, not supersede it. Certainly if there's an incident, it has to still be reported, but we can also drive and help leaders with data that they can make decisions about, staffing, maybe behavioral health techs, increasing security patrols on the unit and things like that.
One of my colleagues was telling me at a recent conversation we had about it, there are now German Shepherd dogs that they're not canine dogs, they're German Shepherd dogs that are escorting with the security guard just through the hospital, not as a way of, it's a deterrent, really, just to show that.
It's just a visual show.
Just a visual that, hey, we're taking this seriously. We don't want you to kind of act out. And I think, there's so many reasons why we're seeing more incivility. And and obviously when you come into an ER, and do you think that's where most of the violence and verbal assaults are happening, in the emergency room?
Well, you would think that, right? But it's not isolated to there. Now, they certainly have a number of incidences, but when Strongline is deployed in an entire organization, you see that there are events happening outside. A lot of times neuropsych units, certainly behavior health units. But what we're seeing now is really, pediatric organizations, children's hospitals. The Children's Hospital Association actually just had us on to do a webinar. The level of incivility that's impacting the children's hospitals now is really escalating, and they're all seeking kind of what we would be a subtle alerting system, right? You don't want to further escalate a family or a child, but this, with our discrete notification, we can kind of get help to where it needs to in a quick way without that kind of always that big show of force.
Right.
But, the children's hospitals they're not alone in this, but there's, kind of parental anxiety, bad diagnosis and
Right.
internal pressure. But the other news source is now the cyberbullying, and the gender affirming staff are under assault. A few of the children's hospitals where we've deployed recently, they actually have like their leads of their hospitals, their Ring doorbells ring to the FBI. They don't ring to their regular kind of,
Wow.
app on your phone. So there's been so many serious threats at these gender affirming clinics that, we've pivoted and we've done their areas first in a major deployment at the children's hospital. So it's something that is new, and we don't take that lightly.
Wow. I forgot about that. Wasn't it Cincinnati, or was a threat to Cincinnati?
It was Boston.
Boston.
Yep, Boston. That was very public about theirs, and then there have been others with some organizations not being as public, but that I know have in fact happened.
So hearing that and hearing all of the other kind of, I want to say minimal, but, smaller incidences, there seems to be, and anywhere you look, American Nurses Association, the American Hospital Association, everybody's on board. All these organizations are on board, kind of minimizing workplace violence. So why do you think so little has changed? I know we're going to talk about legislation, but
Yeah.
why do you think just in the operation so little has changed?
Well, a chief nursing officer from Denver said to me that we've normalized this so much in our profession that we don't think it's out of the ordinary. And so that was a telling statement.
Yeah.
I use that a lot. But I do go back to the fact that it's state regulated, and the states have not taken the initiative. It's very hard, right? Texas is working so hard through the Texas Nurse Association to make a dramatic improvement and to make it a felony to attack any healthcare worker. There is legislation, about striking emergency department staff. That is a felony. But the interesting thing and the dumbest thing is if you have a float nurse down, taking care of an ICU patient in the ER, and they're the person that's attacked, they're not considered emergency personnel. So then that legislation doesn't stick to them.
Geez.
So it's just,
that's nuts.
It's bureaucratic. I think it's unrecognized by people who could make a difference, and normalize. Like it every day. I just, we talked a little bit before, every day you see some airline making an emergency landing because there's an unruly passenger. If we were on the news every day for a nurse, the latest data from the last quarter of 2022 is a nurse is injured at work. 2 RNs are injured at work every hour.
Jesus, across our country. Across the country.
2
every
Denver,
hour?
It's every 30 minutes. A nurse or a healthcare worker is injured.
Wow.
And so if that fact was on the news every night when you turned on your local or national news, I think there would be more headlines. But for whatever reason, it's not getting the level of media and press coverage that it should.
Well, I know the American Nurses Association has a campaign. I think it's I think it's endnurseabuse.org.
Right.
So
and the emergency department is like, say no to ED, don't be silent to ED violence. And I will say, you don't often hear people compliment the Joint Commission, but I would like to, because they, in 2022, it became a mandate to have kind of a very holistic, interdisciplinary workplace violence committee, similar to, other committees that have been, mandated to start to take a good 360 view at workplace violence. Oftentimes these solutions are addressed like maybe through just solely in the security arm, or maybe in the HR arm, and then a clinician is really wanting to be involved, and it's so siloed that it's just not a comprehensive solution. And now the Joint Commission has made it a mandate to have this kind of big holistic 360 view of workplace violence, and hopefully looking at really good solutions, not just with technology, but with all the things that are entailed in a workplace violence committee.
Yeah, because it's not, I mean, certainly your tool is part of the solution, right? Part of creating a more safe environment where people are going to feel like they're protected, or at least supported, right? That somebody's going to come when they press the tool, right?
That's right. And then we're just one tool in the toolbox, right? Where there has to be other things happening, and another thing that I've heard recently that is, it's an interesting phenomenon. We used to be required to take, maybe say 8 hours of some type of hands-on kind of response to violent situations. So that there's CPI and there's MOAB and there's all these kind of contents out there. But with the level of nurse turnover and the money and the finances involved in these kind of long ongoing courses that require recertifications yearly and every year, that hospitals are cutting back on those and really putting up like behavioral SWAT teams, like our rapid response team. So they're training core members instead of everyone. And so, you see a little bit maybe less training, but more focused training. So then Strongline becomes a nice complement for staff who, and I was at AONL this year, and someone quoted at my booth and said, "We are a country of new graduates." And so when you give a new graduate this tool, right, that they are, there's definitely the disconnect and the shock between the scholarly life of a student and the real life of a new grad after orientation. You're giving them another tool where they can feel safe. Right away, and it's on their body, always with them, and it's perceived as a really good complement to their other education they're getting.
So Jeannie, there's a lot of folks who listen to our podcast who are not healthcare people. So I'd like to encourage them who are listening to kind of be proactive and talk to your legislators, or what can we do to drum up action about this? I mean, that the I think it's called the SAVE Act, Safety from Violence for Healthcare Employee Act. So that's the one that's in Congress now, I think.
Yeah. I think just we have to shine a spotlight on it, right? If it stays under the covers, no one knows that it's happening, and at every level, right? Well, this goes for everything in our country, right? If you don't get involved, nothing's going to change, right? So you have to get involved. I encourage anybody who's a non-healthcare worker or healthcare worker, we need to talk about this. We need to be open about it. We have to have conversation. We can't keep it, as the emergency nursing, campaign is, don't be silent on ED violence. We have to talk about it at every opportunity. And that's also part of my role at Strongline, is to increase the public awareness, not only in healthcare, but the general public, to shine a spotlight on this.
Okay. Yeah, I would certainly feel like the more we talk about it, the better off we'll be. And certainly social media is a way to do that as well, right? And I know you're active on social media to bring to light some of these acts and bills that are being considered. So at the very least, we could click or send an email to our Congress people.
That's right.
And let them know about it. Certainly, we're not going to solve it in this podcast, but I certainly appreciate your input in this, and I applaud your efforts at doing this, Jeannie, and getting tools into the right hands so that nurses feel safer. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I know the emergency nursing, and I don't mean to leverage them, but I'm most familiar with their work. They just had their day on the Hill, where our board and leadership team go to Capitol Hill and they meet with their legislators, and they met with quite a few senators and House of Representatives who were nurses by background. And so leveraging, their expertise, again, that kind of chameleon, right? That nurse that's now dedicating his or her life to politics, and how they can help us influence, upcoming legislation is really important too, and to stay aware of who in your political arena is going to make an impact for us for the better.
Yeah, I know there's an effort also on social media about more nurses in office, in political office, for this probably for this very reason, to let the folks that are making decisions and policy decisions know.
Exactly.
Line. So thank you for your efforts, and thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anything I can do to help, kind of share the good news about how Strongline is keeping staff safe and increase the awareness of all of our staffs and hospitals' lack of safety is really my pleasure to do that, and just keep spreading the good news.
Good job. Good job. All right. Well, thank you, Jeannie. Take care.
All right. Have a great day.
If you have any questions that you would like us to address in a future episode, please email us at podcast@guardiannurses.com. That email again is podcast@guardiannurses.com. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us this week. You can find the Lighting Your Way podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, YouTube, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you liked what you heard, tell a friend and leave us a review. You can learn all about Guardian Nurses Healthcare Advocates on our website, guardiannurses.com. So until next time, find some joy in your life, pet all the good doggies and kitties, and remember to tell your people that you love them. Take care.